to kind of kick us off the show, we have Ali Jamal with Stable Gold Hospitality. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
Great. So kind of share with us your story of what got you into real estate.
Yeah, so I'll try to keep this somewhat condensed for your audience. But essentially, I bought my first piece of real estate when I was 19 years old. I had saved up about $20,000 between a couple of jobs while I was in college, and the deal that I had with my mother at the time when I was saving this money is that once I had saved this $20,000, she would come on my 19th birthday to the car dealership with me and co-sign on a loan for a new car. And unfortunately, or fortunately, as when the time came around, I went to speak to my mom on my birthday about going to the car dealership with that $20,000, and she looked at me for a couple of seconds and she says, "Son, you might be one of the stupidest people I've ever seen in my life, because if you think I'm going to let you take that $20,000 and put it towards that car versus something that's going to hopefully pay you into the future, you are nuts." So begrudgingly, she grabbed my ear, took me to a development in downtown Vancouver. I lived in Vancouver, Canada at the time. And there was a condo going for sale for about $170,000. And so she made, to make a long story short, she made me put that $20K as a down payment on that condo. To give you context of how right she was over time, that same condo, which I still own, by the way, as of today, but when I left Vancouver when I was 27 to come to Atlanta, by that time, that same condo was worth about $2.5 million. So, and that's somewhat abnormal because, of course, Vancouver's real estate was just crazy during that period of time. So part of that is luck, but it serves a very serves as a very good lesson, over and above the fact that if it wasn't for my mom, I'd probably be driving a rusted out Honda Civic Si right now. But over and above that, the appreciation opportunity in real estate, if you buy in the right markets, is definitely by far one of the better alternatives from an investing perspective, in my opinion. So that's kind of what started me as a real estate investor at an early age. Over time, as the valuation of that condo went up, I started to take out equity from that piece of real estate. And then once again, my first thought process was, let me take that equity and now buy a nice car. And again, my mom brought me down to earth and was like, no, you're going to buy another condo. And to make a long story short, over the span of between the age of 19 and 27, I had built up a portfolio as a side hustle of I think by that time it was 20 homes or something like that. And I was doing a whole bunch of different things. So aside from working my corporate job that I was working at the time, and owning these places, I started to rent out the homes on a room by room basis to get more cash flow. Some of them I would, I bought as duplexes, fourplexes. So I was getting a lot of cash flow from these assets. My challenge was, though, all the money that I was making from rent from these assets, the money was going straight to mortgages. And so there was really no strong cash flow, or not strong enough cash flow, where I could pivot into real estate investing full time, which was really what I wanted to do. That was where my passion was. And from an economic perspective, I could see that that's where the real payoff was going to be for me in the long run. And so I'm speaking to my accountant in 2011. Once again, I was about 27 years old. And I was, telling her I really want to do real estate investing full time, but I'm just not in the position to do so. And she's like, "Look, Ali, there's a huge, recession going on in the US right now. And what you're buying houses for here in Vancouver, you could get 100 unit apartment complex in cities like Atlanta or St. Louis or whatever. And if you can operate it correctly, you'll be able to live off the cash flow of one of those properties." And so to me, I couldn't even, it didn't make any sense to me, because here I am in Vancouver buying condos for $700,000 and mortgaging most of that. And it was just such different context. So she connected me with a broker here in Atlanta, who showcased to me a 127 unit hotel in Roswell, Georgia. So I flew out visited the property, walked through it, and found really quickly that what she was saying was right. There was a lot of opportunity to acquire decent assets at a very low price point at that point in time. And so the second question, once I walked the property, for me was, okay, looks like a good potential deal, but what would I do with it? Because here you have a exterior corridor hotel in a suburb in Atlanta. Most hotels in that area and across the city and probably across the US at the time were not doing very well because, once again, because of the recession. And so I was driving around the neighborhood just trying to kind of figure out what local occupancy rates were and all that kind of stuff. And basically all the local hotels in that area were running at very low occupancy rates, probably 30% and below. But the hotel right adjacent to this one that I was looking at potentially acquiring was a Studio 6. And for those of you who are not familiar with Studio 6, it's basically an offshoot of the Motel 6 model. And it's basically for individuals who want to stay for longer periods of time. So weekly kind of stays. And this Studio 6 was jam-packed. The parking lot was overflowing. And I was like, what in the world are they doing that's so different than these other hotels? So I decided to stay there that night. Stay to the Studio 6. And I found really quickly what their business model was really just brilliant. Essentially, they were running an apartment complex, but under hotel regulations, which means that if a tenant or a customer of yours does not pay for their stay, instead of you being tied into a 60-day eviction process, you just get them out the next day. You call the cops and they're gone. So that protects your cash flow. So here you have a business where you can fill your units fairly quickly because the price for rent is going to be fairly low, but then you don't have to fight for your evictions and deal with all the costs that go along with that. And so to me, I was like, if we can just copy what these guys are doing, we should be good, because the cost of this 127 unit hotel was very low. Full transparency, it was about $1 million at the time. So well below replacement cost, right? To build that hotel, even at that time from the ground up, would have cost me $5 or $6 million minimum. And so just if you're picking it up at $1 million, you already know you're buying value. And so that's essentially what we did. So fairly quickly, I was able to raise capital between family and friends. And I was lucky to be able to do that because honestly, I had no track record in the hotel space. So I was really, my mom remortgaged one of her homes, was able to get some money from uncles in England, was able to, scrounge up a little bit of my own capital, and we were able to put together the $1 million to acquire this hotel. So now put together the money, bought the hotel. Now we had a business concept, which was run it like an apartment complex, but I didn't really still know how it would do and how we would be able to kind of, generate the traffic from the next door neighbor, Studio 6. Within about 60 days, we implemented the business model, which essentially, once again, nothing extraordinarily brilliant. It was just, what are they charging a week for the rooms? Okay, they're charging $400. Let's do $200. That was basically it, just to see how much traffic we could take over. Within about 90 days, we're sitting about 80% occupancy at a $30 average daily rate per night. So let's just say 127 rooms, so let's say 115, 120 of them rented a night at $30. You can do the math, about, let's say, approximately $3,000 a day. You've already created $1 million business very quickly on a property that you picked up for $1 million. You can't really beat those numbers, So my investors were obviously very happy, and part of this was I was able to manage the operating costs by living in the hotel. So. And that was a blessing at the time because it forced me to learn the business from the ground up. And so I lived in the hotel for 3 years, ran pretty much every component of the business. And now my investors were very happy. So as you guys already know, if your investors are happy, the likelihood is they're going to want to, reinvest into the snowball. And that's really what happened. So we started acquiring more hotels, and as time went on, we kind of scaled the business. So as of today, we've grown the business. We have 16 hotel locations across the country, all within the same model, representing approximately 3,000 units, 3,000 doors. And then we've diversified into other real estate divisions. So we have a vacation rental division, which has about 20 homes or so. We have a residential division, which has about 20 homes. We have an event hall division where we serve as like a landlord on event halls, which are about, I think 7 or 8 of those. And we also have a commercial division, which is growing. So, overall now we've kind of built a portfolio of about $80 million of assets under management over the last 13 years. And it's just been a great, it's been a great journey. It's been fun.
Great. Wow. So at the end of the day, did you finally get a car?
I finally did get a car. So it took me till I was like 38 to finally buy my dream car. So my dream car has always been a McLaren.
Oh.
And so I ended up getting a McLaren, just 3 years ago for the first time. Now, to give you context on that as well, the funny part of that is up until I got my McLaren, I was driving a Ford pickup for the longest period of time. So, and it all started with me because I never drove a pickup back in Vancouver, but when I got the first hotel, I needed to go to Home Depot, pick up supplies, and you're doing all this kind of stuff, and it's a little bit more rugged at that point. And so for the longest period of time, I was driving a pickup. Even when I got my corporate office, I still couldn't, because I was so comfortable in the truck then. And then really by that point, it's like your need and want for that. So I kind of had outgrown it. It wasn't really a big value proposition, but I looked back and I was like, you know what? This has been on my bucket list for a long time. And I'm not going to, I don't want to be 80 years old enjoying, a sports car. Which is fine if you are, but for me, I wanted to enjoy it while I still had, some semblance of black hair left. Okay. And, so that's pretty much gone now, but I was able to get in at least those couple of years with it. So,
yeah. Well, now, how was it like turning the tables on your mom where you're approaching her about, and of course with your family members of this investment opportunity here in Georgia?
So how was it in terms of what was their response?
Well, not just her, but kind of turning the tables on her because she was the one who brought you into real estate.
Yes.
Now you're bringing her a deal instead of her bringing you a prospect.
Well, moms are always going to be the easiest sell because they're going to they're going to look over all your flaws, right? And they're really going to, for as hard as she was, and she had a tough life coming to Canada as a refugee, and she had much tougher life than I did. So, but she's always going to be my number one fan, obviously. So, she hesitated for a couple seconds, asked a lot of tough questions, and then she was like, okay, if you want to do it, go, I'm going to support you. We're just, and I've been blessed with someone like that in my life. So yeah, on my mom's side, it was a little bit easier. My uncles, I have 3 uncles in London who were, were very shrewd investors. And so they had a lot of tough questions. And so me being 27, not running a business per se before, I had rental properties, but that's very different than running a full on operation. They were, they were coming at me with every tough question you could imagine. And I didn't pass the test of most of their questions, but they still, were able to look past that. Side note though, one of those uncle's investors at 75. When I took over the hotel for the first 3 months, he stayed on site with me to make sure that his money wasn't going down the. He was like, I'm going to make sure that you're doing the right thing. So, even though I was sweat equity, I did have a lot of support. And even at the, he came in a later stage in his life, but the wisdom that he provided was way outweighed the monetary investment. This having someone, and a lot of times, especially in that kind of scenario, it's not even the wisdom per se. It's just having the moral support. Someone would be like, you know what, this looks like a pretty tough project. You might have, taken a bigger bite than what you can chew. However, let's do it. I got your back. We're going to make this work. Sometimes just having that gets you over some of the hard stuff. You know what I mean? Because the wisdom side of things, we have enough tools now where you can Google answers to stuff, right? If I'm having a hard time with the hotel at whatever, I can learn it fairly quickly with all the tools that we have technology wise. But what we don't have is that personal touch, right? Where someone can be like, hey, you know what? You'll be all right. Today was a tough day. Let's start from scratch tomorrow and do it. That's what he provided, which was more valuable than anything else.
And kind of speaking of wisdom, there's 2 I guess, elephant questions that I imagine our listeners definitely want to ask you, because you've experienced approaching family members for investments in business. That's a very touchy subject. And then, of course, the other side is being able to find more or less a mentor or someone to kind of be your cheerleader per se. Kind of share with the audience, like how was your mindset going in with your relatives, or in this case, your uncle, and not just passing the trial of the questions, but kind of convincing them enough, or kind of what the thought process going through all that was like.
So the history behind my relationship with the uncles is interesting, because so what happened before leading up to that time is between the ages of going back to 19 and 27, when I was back in Vancouver, every summer I would have to go to London to work in their hotels. So I had already and I was working for free. It's not like it's like a paid internship. It's like, no, you're working here because you're our bloodline, and it is what it is, right? Okay. So it was that sort of thing. And I remember, just to give you context of kind of their philosophy on life and business, I remember the first day I was working with them, I came downstairs, jeans and a t-shirt, okay? Very West Coast kind of, and I'm thinking, it's not like you have a Hilton or something, like, these are just basic bed and breakfast. And I'm working the desk, I'm here for free. Kind of had a different thought process than they did, for sure. He looked at me for a couple of seconds. He's like, go back upstairs, put on your suit and tie, and that's what you're going to wear every single. And so every day I had to wear a suit and tie the entire day. And that British kind of just strong, strict kind of component of like how to run a business got instilled in me very early. So like even till today, I still wear a suit and tie to my own office. I don't obviously have to answer to anyone to wear that. And people a lot of times ask me like, why do you wear a suit and tie? Like you don't even, and it's so ingrained in me that it's just a part of how I approach my day now, because it gives me that structure and it anchors me. And so going back to your original question, that relationship was already in place. So by the time he had come out there, we had such a history of working together from that aspect of things that, it very nicely aligned.
So then for our listeners that were thinking they can just have a secret where they can just immediately approach their family members, and if they don't have that history, the receptors might be a little different.
Absolutely. I think that's a great point. I think like with anything in life, it's about branding yourself, right? And so even coming back to the family context, you're not going to get anyone to invest in you if they don't believe in the person that you are. So my brand, I guess at that time in my life, was not so much successful execution of business, because I didn't have that track record, but it was integrity for sure, because they knew that, going back to the example, I worked for free every summer, right? Without even asking for payment after the first time. And doing certain things. So I think it's just like family and real life business, there's a lot of similarities. And I think so I created a brand within my family where they knew that they can trust me, and that even on the real estate side that I had already started, there was some level of track record and success, and they probably saw what I was doing, at least from a hard work perspective and some of those things. So I think I built that brand within my family, and they were willing to invest in that. So whether it's outside of family or inside, I think it's going to be very challenging to find investors, and if people don't have trust in where they're giving their capital. And so, yeah, that relationship and track record definitely, has to be there to a certain extent, except with moms, they'll overlook some stuff. So,
yeah, cool. Well, then kind of going back to your experience, you shared about living in the hotel for like 3 years, but you've also already had some kind of hotel hospitality experience. Kind of share with the audience, like what you've learned that would not have been possible if you had not lived there on site. Because when we're talking about real estate investors, a lot of people have this kind of dream where there's these ads on YouTube and everything else. Oh, you can be a passive investor, just dump money here and then magic happens. But I'm going to assume it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I'd say, look, if you want to be a passive investor, and we call that an LP, right? Like some limited partner. And there's, as you said, there's so many pitches out there to get LPs into deals. You can make money as a LP or a passive investor but you're not going to make as much as the person managing the asset. So you got to understand that, number one, and hopefully most people it's advertised that way. Sometimes it's not, from what I see. And the other thing is that I think just in general, I would say from my experience, and I don't know if this is an industry standard, but like I would say if people are telling you as an LP or a passive investor that you're going to get a 10% return on your money, realistically it's probably going to be like 5, right? Like it's just the advertising number that people are going to push you on versus like the reality number there's going to be a huge spread there. Mm-hmm. So that I would say that I'd say if there's someone who wants to now get into the actual active management and ownership of real estate, my advice for them is start small. So start and like that doesn't mean that you can't grow a real estate portfolio, but like don't try to take on an apartment building right away. Mm-hmm. Buy a single family residential home. And if you want to try to push cash flow, see what you can do with that home. Turn it into a vacation rental. Rent it out by the room. There's a whole bunch of third-party programs like companies like Padlist and all this other kind of stuff that will manage your room rentals now. There's so many creative ways in which you can monetize that single-family home in a strong way that you know the sky is really the limit. And if you can get even more creative and start acquiring homes utilizing owner finance models or creative finance models where you're not paying the 9 or 10% the banks are charging you, but you can work out a situation where someone who needs to really get rid of their home will work with you and give you a 3 or 4% interest rate. There's all these interesting strategies you can use on that very small micro level that you can hone your skills on and then start building.
So for our listeners that are kind of hearing your origin story, they're thinking, all right, well, I might not have family members I can just lean on or work over summer for free. I'm a little older than 19. Mm-hmm. You did share the tidbit of, well, just start with one and start small. Well, for those who might have started small and then kind of one step or half a foot out, because you mentioned it was kind of your side gig, at what point kind of in your career where you knew, all right, I need to like go full all in or just let this kind of continue as a kind of a quote unquote side thing?
I think it comes down to, and I hate because I think this word is like overly used, but like I think it really does come down to passion. If that's something you want to do, so it's like I don't think everyone's meant to or built to do real estate investing full time or become an entrepreneur full time. I don't think there's anything wrong at all for someone to be an entrepreneur, to work within an organization and maybe even negotiate equity in that organization or do something of that nature, and then keep a side hustle of real estate or work for an organization, forget the entrepreneur aspect of it, just get a good, decent salary and start investing on the side. I mean, going back to my mother, you know, she's a refugee from East Africa, came to Canada, was working clerical jobs, nothing extraordinary. She was making $30,000, $40,000 a year at most. And she built up a portfolio of like 20, 30 homes, right? She was a multimillionaire as a single mom, as a refugee. Much more impressive than anything I've not even close to that. So, you know, if you think about that, I don't think you have to by any means get into real estate investing full time. I think you can do what you love, do it on the side as a nice investment vehicle. And you can really merge both. If you want to do it full time and if you have that passion, then I think there's a lot of different pivots that you can utilize. But I would say make sure, like everyone's story is going to be different and everyone's backdrop will be different. So like you said, like a lot of people are not going to have the opportunity for, you know, family investors or even investors at all, right? And so you need to build that base. You need to start, while you're working, go to meetups, sell people on the fact that you don't have the capital, but you are willing to be sweat equity in, you know, even smaller deals. And I think once you can build that smaller base, then you can kind of go from there. It's just going to take you longer than it would someone with those connections. That makes sense.
Yeah. So as kind of closing out the questions for our younger audience that has got their ears perked up, what kind of advice would you have given to your younger self if you had started all over?
Take more risks if you can. So, and what I mean, so I think if you're 19 and you have a little bit of income coming in and you can acquire more than one piece of real estate, I would absolutely do it, because you have a lot of runway ahead of you where even if you fail, you can get back on your feet and, and succeed again, build up your portfolio again. So I would say plant as many seeds as you can early. Because the time to take risks is really, in my opinion, in your younger age versus doing it at 45, right? And 50, where you're going to have a lot more responsibilities and things of that nature. Obviously, that's somewhat balanced with the fact that at that age, at 19, you're not going to have the same financial resources as you would at 45. So it's, it's a little bit of a tricky puzzle, but if you can figure out how to take more risks that are calculated at an early stage in your life, I think it's going to pay you back significantly more going into the future. Because as you know, being a real estate or being an investor yourself, the earlier you get started and the more, runway you have, the more successful you're going to be from a compounding factor into the future. And so just start early and be as aggressive as you can early on.
So how can our listeners reach out and find you to learn more?
So my personal website is alijamal.com. And from there, you can go to any of our company websites. We have various companies, as I mentioned, in the various sectors that we're involved in real estate. But the best place to start is alijamal.com. And that's a great way to connect. I connect with anyone who messages me through there. So feel free to do so.
Great. Thank you.
Awesome.